Hello everyone and welcome to Plane Time. I'm Ben Coleman, your anchor host for Plane Time, here at our Florida Aviation Network studios in Orlando, Florida. Thank you for joining us, and we are here today, as usual, to share with you some compelling and interesting maintenance-related, safety-related stories, if you will, to enhance the aviation safety industry. All you young people out there listening, listen close, because there's going to be a lot of information. All you old people out there, like me, listen close. There's going to be a lot of information you're going to learn, because when do you stop learning? Everybody knows the answer to that one. And we're here with a volunteer, all of our cast is here, and our crews and everybody associated with this are here as volunteers for the right and the same reasons, to bring you compelling, maintenance-related for plane time, safety information. Today is no different. We have a little twist for you though, because what the heck does air traffic control have to do with aviation safety and maintenance? I've got an idea. I want to develop that with a guy that's come to us all the way from Indianapolis, Mr. Dean Brown. Dean?
Thanks for inviting me, Ben.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And Dean, you're down from Indianapolis. And I want to thank you for bringing this cold weather that we're having down in Central Florida. What temperature was it today?
Indy, when I woke up this morning here, was 10 degrees.
10 degrees. Oh, righty then. When are you going back to Indianapolis?
I'm going back tonight and it'll be snowing. So.
Okay. Well, enjoy your time here in Central Florida, Dean. But Dean, you are an active air traffic controller with the FAA. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Are you here to talk about anything on behalf of the FAA?
I am not. So I do want to make clear I'm going to talk about emergencies, in-flight emergencies. I'm also a flight instructor. And really when I'm talking today, I'm talking as if I'm really a flight instructor who knows a lot about controlling, even though my professional day job is as a controller. So everything I say is my personal opinion. It's not official FAA policy.
Well, Dean, I'm very, very curious about your passion is obvious, and we have developed a certain rapport up to now. But it's just so exciting that I hear air traffic control guys that have pilot experience. And what is the most important rating that you have as a pilot? Not to put you on the spot, where you learned in, what you learned most about aviation.
I got my start in gliders. I'm a huge fan of getting started with gliders. I then moved to tail wheels, which for me reinforces the need for using the rudder. But gliders was probably the most important thing for making me understand aerodynamics.
And energy management. I mean, you have no motors to climb on. You got to treat it like a bird. But that's how important is that for you as an air traffic controller to have that knowledge of a pilot base?
Most controllers are not pilots. For me, it really helps understand what the pilots are going through. It's not required. In an emergency, though, it's really helpful, and it forces me, going back to the glider stuff, to try to simplify stuff. You know, the whole in an emergency mantra of aviate, navigate, communicate, it's not really a checklist to get you to do all three of those. It's really something to get you to slow down and focus on the aviate. And aviate means, you know, focusing on just flying the airplane, the basic aerodynamics, while you're troubleshooting all those complicated systems. And it almost takes you back to a glider while you start to add in some of the stuff. So.
Well, and it's really very, I'm curious as to how you personally and professionally try to introduce that to your agency to encourage the air traffic controllers to get your pilot's license, get your mechanic's license. Even don't even have to worry about the license, just get the experience. I mean, people get so wrapped up around the axle about having to have the license, but there's a lot of people out there with a lot of good experience that don't have a license. So just because you don't have a license don't mean you don't have experience.
Right.
So from an emergency standpoint, Dean, what is the most perishable point of air traffic control when you're working with that target or that customer and something's going on in that aircraft that you don't know about and you're trying to figure out why are they doing this? What is the key aspect, and I'm going to drag this out of you, of what you would prefer pilots to tell you in their own frequency and you're working that target?
So assuming that a pilot has a problem and it's not something where I notice them coming off of their expected flight track, really, I just encourage pilots to, tell us what's going on and be upfront with us. There's a lot of cases where problems become more serious because the pilot tries to hide something from us, either they minimize something like a developing mechanical problem or non-mechanical issues like VFR and IMC. Get a lot of pilots who sort of beat around the bush, they kind of fib. And they say, we're trying to avoid clouds when in fact they're in it. And as a controller, if I hear that somebody's trying to avoid clouds, I think they're VMC, my actions are predicated on that, and I'm maybe giving them control instructions that are not appropriate to a VFR pilot in IMC. Developing mechanical problems, if somebody has a rough running engine, I would much rather find out about that in a timely fashion, because we always have a team that can kind of get started behind the scenes, get ahead of the problem, start looking at potential landing sites if somebody needs to make a quick diversion, rather than have somebody minimize the problem, not say a word. 3 minutes later, the engine catastrophically fails, and they tell us, hey, engine failure, and now we've got to scramble. It's in your best interest to be up front with us. There's no paperwork in any meaningful sense whatsoever after an emergency.
And funny you should mention the paperwork, because some of the guys that I've flown with in the past, and gals, they said, I'm not going to say anything to air traffic control because they're going to come back and nail me with an enforcement action because I forgot to secure the fuel cap on the airplane. No. And took off, and I'm porting fuel. I'm not going to tell them I made a mistake. Fill out paperwork all day long on the ground in the comfort of a FBO, and it may be uncomfortable with some of the questions they ask, but from an air traffic control standpoint, bring out further what you guys and gals do that can help us as pilots with a mechanical. For example, every movie, we've seen the movie about where they got the controller talking to, and they get a specialist on that particular landing gear system. And they'll try to talk them down what to do with that. How important is the timing of when you're able to pull in that specialist?
So one way to break down emergencies is just to think about time available emergencies and time not available emergencies. So single engine failure, you really have not time available, you're kind of rushed. In time available ones, then we can get somebody like me who's a pilot rated controller to help out. Most controllers are not pilots, so it might take a couple minutes to get somebody like me to come back from break or get pulled out of the sector I'm working to come and help you. Sometimes you get lucky and you get somebody like me right away. But it might take just a few minutes. In the meantime, make sure you aviate the airplane.
I'm going to bring up a term, I'm going to throw this ado at you. I always kind of refer back to the ultimate airman. To me, an ultimate airman is a professional pilot as well as a professional mechanic. The best of two worlds. When you know too much about the aircraft that you fly, when you're on fire. I know that's too much information for me. We're on fire, we're going down. But you can never know too much. How about the ultimate controller? And we talked about this from the very beginning. You're unusual. There's probably less than 10, 20% of the controllers that are experienced pilots. But would you not support me on, from an air traffic control standpoint, get your air traffic controllers that are, encourage them to get their pilots or mechanics information as far as being where to get the information. So help me and develop the ultimate controller as far as doing about aviation systems, aviation maintenance, everything.
Right. One short answer on that one is one of the things I'm working on. I'm not actually personally a big fan of the idea that gets kicked around every so often that all controllers should have a pilot's license. I mean, that's great, that's wonderful. Even if we did that, A, there's budget constraints. B, you're going to get people who get sold or maybe a private license in a training airplane, and that's not going to provide enough information for what we need. So this isn't the place to talk about it. I've been working on some training videos for controllers that show them the essentials of what to understand from a pilot's perspective. And it's kind of based on peer-to-peer discussion. I'm just talking about, here's, dear fellow controllers, here's what I would do, here's what I would be looking at in different emergencies based on my experience. You do what you need to, but as an experienced controller, experienced pilot who's done all this research, it's useful. And some of that, I do have a suggested flight simulator curriculum for controllers to use so that they can practice this kind of stuff from a pilot's perspective.
And it's all good information to keep in mind. And also, I want to mention the fact that air traffic controllers can sometimes get to talking just a little bit faster than I can hear and understand and actually write down. Used to just I was petrified when they get November 435 Charlie. We have an amendment to your clearance. Oh my God, the world is going to come to an end. I've got to jot down a clearance amendment. Or now you go into your Garmin 650 and you start punching in all these numbers. But the terminologies and the speed at which we speak can sometimes be very debilitating from a pilot standpoint, and from an air traffic standpoint. You get a pilot that you can't understand, and they're excited. They have a mechanical emergency. We have a problem of a very serious nature. What can you do as an air traffic controller to calm these folks down a little bit, bring it down a notch?
So some of this stuff I've developed for controllers. One of the videos I've put together is about if you learn only one thing. And that one thing is a reminder to controllers that whether we like it or not in an emergency, we have what I call voice of God powers. And I don't mean to be blasphemous in any way. It's just if a pilot, especially during a serious emergency, is dealing with something, that voice coming through their headset is like their lifeline to the outside world. Their memories trying to conjure up all the things they learned from plane time and their flight instructors and everybody else over time, all the safety seminars. And it can be a flood of information. But the voice of God, we have to be careful how we as controllers use that. And so among other things, I'd like to give at least 2 specific communication tips. Number 1, during an emergency, a lot of controllers, we really do want to try to be helpful, and we can be giving you too much information or information at a time that's inconvenient for the busy pilot. I absolutely support 110% in an emergency, in addition to regular flight too, but in an emergency, if the controller is saying too much, too fast, or at a bad time, tell us to stand by. And the controller should either say nothing or roger, okay? If we don't get it then, tell us to shut up or just ignore us. And if you need to ignore us because you're that busy, by all means ignore us, but feel free to say stand by. The other thing is, in normal pilot ATC communications, there's something of a cadence. We go back and forth. Clearance, readback, request. I tell you, stand by. You know, we go back and forth in these little snippets, and we get used to a certain pacing. In an emergency, one thing that happens, I've seen a number of times, is a pilot will say something, they'll key up, they'll start to say something about the emergency. They pause for a second, almost without realizing it, and then they start to provide details. Well, we're trying to be helpful, and we're used to a certain cadence, and so when there's that pause, we think they've unkeyed, we start talking, we're both talking at once, nothing's getting communicated on either side, and yet we each think that we've communicated something. So it's easier said than done, but on the pilot side, in an emergency, try to stay keyed up and talking, because if you pause, that's likely to happen. On the controlling side, I want controllers to better understand that if we hear that pause for just a second, give it maybe an extra second before we start talking.
Yeah, talking over someone on frequency is not desirable on either side of the house. Mm-hmm. The aspect of with control of the frequency, when you do have, and I'm going to use the term stuck mic. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with a stuck mic when, particularly when you have someone that's having a mechanical emergency en route, and they panic, and they do either hit the PTT button, or if they're using a microphone or a hand mic, you know, they're going to clench on that button. Mm-hmm. Is there anything you can do to get their attention?
2 generic strategies we have for stuck mics. If the other pilots on the frequency, if you hear a stuck mic, it's good anyway to monitor 121.5 on your second comm radio for a variety of reasons. That's one of them. The other thing is, if you hear a stuck mic on frequency, feel free to go back to your previous frequency. Tell that controller you've come back because that frequency you were on had a stuck mic. Now, if you're the pilot who has the stuck mic, there's probably little that can be done because you're just keyed up and talking and you don't know. So on our end, we're hoping it's not a serious situation. We're secretly rooting for you to say something embarrassing that we can use later.
Well, and you have to make, at some point, light of a bad situation.
Yeah.
You mentioned a frequency, 121.5. Mm-hmm. I'm not a pilot. What does that have to do with anything? That's
the guard frequency, the emergency frequency. Oh. If in doubt, go there. Although I have seen some pilots, it's probably more the stress of an emergency, leave the ATC frequency they're on and think they need to be on 21.5 for an emergency. You do not. If you're on a frequency already and you have a problem, please stay there. Mm-hmm. If you go on 21.5, depending on where you are, it might be a little harder to talk to you right away. But by all means, use it if you don't know where to go.
So that's basically a good guard frequency, and not a bad idea to turn that frequency on before you shut your aircraft down, just to monitor and make sure you didn't set off your ELT.
Right.
On that last crash, I meant landing that you made, mm-hmm. Crash landing. The Dean, talk to us a little bit more about the en route portion, because we want to. You're working primarily in center now.
I'm a center controller.
And what different aspects of air traffic control we have? We got folks up in the tower, mm-hmm. we call the cab. What other areas of air traffic control do we have?
Slightly simplified version, you've got tower controllers, approach or TRACON controllers, and center controllers. Tower controllers, at some level, and especially if you're thinking about it with an emergency, they really know that area within about 10 miles of the airport really well, and that's where they live. Approach controllers, same kind of thing. They know the area within ballpark 50 miles of the main central airport that they're responsible for, and that's where they live their lives. Their kids, when they're playing high school sports or where they're looking at the weather forecast and they're getting a severe thunderstorm watch for such and such county, they know where that stuff is. Center controllers, personally, I'm Indy Center. My airspace is over parts of Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky. I've been there maybe a dozen times in my life. My airspace is closer to Washington, D.C. than Indy. If you have an emergency there, I don't know that area like the back of my hand. Mm. And just, there are different pros and cons, but at a center, it's going to be a little tougher for the controller to specialize in some ways.
And what altitudes primarily would you be responsible for at center?
For me, it's moved over time. I used to own down to the ground in West Virginia and Kentucky and was vectoring for approaches down there in the mountains and hills and hollers. Currently these days, just with sector rearrangements, personally I'm working flight level 240 and above. So I'm working mostly jet traffic.
Wow, and up there your reduced visual separation minimum. Vertical.
Yes.
Have you seen any problems mechanically? Because there's pretty tight requirements for that, for that equipment on board the aircraft. Do you have any problems coming up every now and then, or?
Every once in a while, one of the components that's needed for the RVSM fails, and it's more of a minor nuisance for us if that happens. It's not really any dire problem.
So you haven't had any aircraft getting what we call wired, if you will, recently or since the development of RVSM?
No, RVSM has really not changed that. And in fact, in some ways, it's made it a little bit easier because I'm old enough, I was around before RVSM. Up high, we had to have 2,000-foot vertical separation. And so to move somebody from, let's say, an eastbound altitude to the next eastbound altitude, we had to climb on 4,000 feet. And some days the airplane just doesn't climb that well, and it'd get a little tight. And now you only have to go 2,000 feet for that comparable situation. It's a lot easier.
This is really out in the tulips there, but do you remember the old aspect back, United Airlines coming in, and the controller kept him up higher and higher and higher, and the pilot, the crew, they knew that they had to, I got to start descending or I'm going to blow over the airport. And the controller told to the pilot, this is kind of a little joke, but we're going to take advantage of the time here. Said, okay, United Flight 83, you're descend to maintain 2,000 feet. And the pilot came back to the controller and said, well, unable. And the controller goes back to the pilot and says, well, you got speed brakes on that thing, don't you? And the pilot comes back to the controller, yeah, but those are for me to use, not you.
Right.
Do you have aspects where the controllers sometimes kind of crawl into the cockpit and try to tell the pilots how to fly the airplane or use the airplane to your advantage and not to the advantage of the crew or the passengers.
Yeah, there's a huge learning curve for being a controller, and it literally, the simplified description is I compare it to chess. Learning the rules of chess are pretty simple. Learning how to really play chess takes a while. The simplified description for controllers is we spend 9-ish months in what you would think of as ground school and a couple of years of on-the-job training with an instructor like me plugged in at the sector and laughing at all the mistakes that you as the trainee controller are making and trying to get you to, but it takes a while. A lot of controllers are going to be in training. That's going to be true going forward for a while as we come out of the COVID situation, hopefully. And so you'll hear some controllers who are going through their own learning curves, and while the pilot's telling the controller unable, the instructor sitting behind the controller is also laughing, going, told you.
Dean, are there any situations where you come up with controllers that just aren't really cut out to be controllers, and they made it through the minimum checks, and they made it through, got their toe in the water, but they just don't have the right stuff? How far does air traffic control system let those folks go before we need to find another position for you, son or ma'am?
There are different stages of weeding out trainees or developmentals, but ultimately there are some who are going to get on frequency and are going to train and train and train on a radar scope or something like that for a while. And it's all done very safely. The instructor's in charge. So when I'm teaching, it's my sector, even if I'm letting the developmental do the talking and so on. So it is done safely, but it is on-the-job training. And eventually they get to a point where they're running the sector in a way that's quite inefficient. And there are processes for either weeding them out or putting them in a facility that's less busy. So it does happen.
And I really don't want to bring that up as a negative, but it's just the reality of the situation. And there is no political correctness when you have someone that's not capable of pulling the load that you know as an experienced air traffic controller that's going to be expected of them down the road. It's just a very, very vital aspect of our aviation safety system, the NAS, National Airspace, where air traffic control is becoming more and more aware. I think pilots are becoming more aware of the importance of having a strong and vital air traffic control system, and we're going more and more computerized. I don't see us becoming totally computerized in the air traffic control market. We haven't really discussed this, but can you see any aspect where the air traffic control, the software, that's us, are not in the system, where it's all automated and it's all plugged in? And I know that there's some folks that are trying to develop that in the nation, if not the world, but to eliminate the software aspect, the human being.
If software is going to replace me, I think the 700-pound gorilla that's going to develop that is the unmanned aerial systems stuff. To put all of those unmanned things up in the air is going to take software rather than me talking. So that's where I think it would come from. That's really a pretty tricky thing. On that general topic, though, and this does apply to emergencies as well, oftentimes, I mean, we're just getting into a system that's more and more automated in so many ways. We've got so many systems now. The avionics are very impressive. They're wonderful. They also have a lot of complexity. In an emergency, it's important for pilots, and there's an analog lesson for controllers as well. But in an emergency, a lot of that technology, you need to kind of ignore some of that stuff. And going back to getting started in gliders, simplify and aviate rather than focus too much on navigating all of your systems, including your avionics at times. I've seen people who are spending so much time heads down with the avionics. It's bad enough anyway, but in an emergency, that can become a distraction. Each situation is unique.
Well, and I think the unique aspect that we have talked about earlier was the fact that, yes, you are an air traffic controller. You control the air traffic in your what airspace you're responsible for. Who is in control of the flight? Is it the air traffic controller or the pilot?
The pilot in command. Now let's try to work together, but especially if you're unable to do something or any kind of emergency situation, you are the pilot in command. A lot of pilots know 91.3. The pilot in command is the final authority as to and has the responsibility for the flight. There's another one in 91.123 about your ability to deviate from an ATC clearance in an emergency if you need to. Controllers have an analogous one in emergency. So in an emergency, our reference is what we would call the 7110.65 2-1-1D3. That's a mouthful.
But who's remembering numbers?
Right.
No.
But in an emergency, we can quote unquote bend the rules to the extent needed as well. But at the end of the day, in an emergency especially, you are in charge. So again, if you need to tell me to stand by, shut up, or you need to do whatever you've got to do, by all means, do it.
And you use the term 91. You're referring to Federal Aviation Regulation 91.3?
Officially 14 Code of Federal Regulations, yes. But yes, 91.3 FAR.
If anybody is listening to these conversations, that's all these acronyms and numbers floating around, how do these guys remember all of this? Well, it's easy. Once you get into the system, you will learn it. Promise me, you will learn. You ever heard of the WINGS program?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Do you realize that if you watch this program today, that we will help you get qualified for one of your WINGS requirements? And at the end of the program, we may give you a code that you can go and plug into your system and get WINGS credit for this. Have you participated in the WINGS program?
Have for years. Yep, big fan.
Okay. And what is the WINGS program? Since you're a big fan, you're a air traffic control FAA employee. Tell us about it.
Oh, I haven't thought about how to best describe this in 30 seconds or so, but it's a great way to self-direct a lot of your own refresher training, to learn new things, to be reminded of old things as well. So it helps you with the flight review process as well.
Excellent, excellent. And Bob Jex, that was for you, big guy. Bob Jex, he's the curator, the overseer of this organization that we use here, and quite an outspoken person for safety. So that was for you. That was for you, Bob, right there, camera one. The WINGS program is just one aspect of what we keep involved with the industry to keep it on a real basis. And we encourage folks to come to safety presentations, briefings, seminars. With this, with the COVID situation, and we are exercising social distancing right now. If somebody is too close to me when they're about 4 inches from my face, that's too close. But we're socially distant, and we're being responsible. But it's a new era in our system, and I'm an old guy. You're not as old as I am. But we got a lot of old people in this business that we've got to find a way to transcend that information and knowledge to our younger folks, and we encourage young folks to get involved. So that's my parting shot for you as we wind this one down.
Okay.
Anything else to share with us?
Just again, that reminder that you're the pilot in charge, you're the pilot in command, especially during an emergency. We're there to help you. Even though we're called controllers, we're not really there to be the final word. You are.
And that goes for maintenance as well as operational issues that you may have. So, Dean, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And I'm going to shut this down for another segment for Plane Time. And at the end of this period, don't go away. We're going to have a code for you to get your WINGS credit. I'm Ben Coleman, anchor host for Plane Time. See you next interview.